Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm doing the reading taste book tag. Now this was made by Harriet's Cozy Games. I will link the original down below. It's proved very popular on booktube since it came out, and I thought given there's been some new subscribers and new faces on the channel, it would be really fun to just go through my reading tastes and sort of try to categorise the variety of stuff that I like to read. The first question is, describe your reading taste in one sentence. And this genuinely has been the question that has stopped me from doing this tag for months now, because I have been really struggling to categorise my reading in that way. And I finally landed on the sentence, never say never. And no, we're not just going to break into song from American Tail. It is, the idea behind that being the sentence is, anytime I say, oh, I read and I don't read crime fiction, or I don't read true crime, or I don't read romance, or I don't read classics, or whatever it is that I say, oh, I tend not to read that, I'll then have like 6 examples of how I've read that topic and really enjoyed it and found, you know, it's always the outlier that proves the rule. So for me, I think my reading, I've really sort of embraced the idea of never say never to anything, to any kind of genre, subgenre, author, subject matter. Especially with my non-fiction, there doesn't seem to be a limit. There have been some amazing books that, like sports memoirs, that I'm not a sporty person, I don't care about it, and yet some of my favourite books out there have been sports memoirs over the years. So I think it's just an example of like, don't rule anything out is what you're going to get with me, which isn't very helpful. So let's move on to question 2, which is describe your reading taste with categories to reference things like genre, age, length, etc. So I've kind of broken it into a few different sections. For my non-fiction, there is always a heavy emphasis on learning. I tend to like the non-narrative non-fiction out there. I'm far more of a facts-based person. Again, having said that, some narrative non-fiction is fantastic. There is more of an emphasis on pop biology, paleontology and history if you look back on my reading, but I am branching out into more physics, mathematics. There's a slant of history of art in there, but the general vibe is a window into a world that I don't know about, or a way of expanding the way that we look at the world in some capacity. For my fiction, it tends to be speculative or historical in some way, and I would include classics within that, because classics is just basically historical fiction that was contemporary in its time. I like it to be our world, but a bit of a kind of what if. I prefer cozy sci-fi to hard space opera type stuff, and again I prefer urban fantasy to more high fantasy, but with all of those there are always exceptions and plenty of examples of high fantasy and space operas that I've enjoyed. I like there to be an element that is a little bit different to our current day, and historical, I'm very happy for it to be in any kind of time period. And with my classics, I vary quite a lot my time period and also my subject matter, whether it be more of your sort of family drama stuff like Austen, or your, you know, like crime noir like Raymond Chandler. None of this is helping to narrow anything down for you new people, is it? So should we just move on? Oh, the other category I wanted to include in here is my romance reading, because that is probably where I get the most contemporary with my reading. My general vibe is not too hallmarky. I like my spice level to be fairly high. Closed Doors has to be incredibly compelling with the characters, and most people can't pull it off. A slight lean towards like fake dating and enemies to lovers, but honestly I will try pretty much anything, because again, never say never. Do you have a really weird monster fucking book? I'll probably give it a go. I don't really mind. Like, we can try many things. Let's move on to show us a few books that represent your reading taste. And I haven't actually collected them today because the house is in a bit of disarray, so you're just going to have them popping up here. The first one is Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs by Steve Brusatte. This is a non-fiction that looks at Steve's career as a paleontologist, but also charts you from the beginning of the dinosaurs all the way to the mass extinction event that took them out. This was my first sort of serious pop paleontology book I ever read. It is the one that I refer to so often, and I think it really just sums up for me my love of paleontology, my love of also learning about the history of paleontology and how we know what we know. Because I think for me, non-fiction is not just what we know about the world, but how we come to know it. And I think that Steve does a really good job of showing you where the dig sites were, how they discovered these things, how advancements in one area change the game for other areas, and just the way that like science is interconnected. So really enjoyed it. And like I say, you always remember your first, so my first paleontology book has to be in there. My next pick is World War Z by Max Brooks. I think this is a really good example of genre fiction that I enjoy. This is a zombie apocalypse, but it is more of a panoramic view of the world and how different societies, cultures, countries would actually handle a zombie invasion. And it's a series of interviews with people who, you know, like on the ground civilians with the first outbreaks, doctors who were involved, politicians, people in the military, and then the big trying to reclaim back the country 10 years after the first zombie invasions, or to reclaim back the world. I really enjoy it because I think that it's really well narrated. I love the audiobook of it, and it's a perfect example of audiobooks that I really enjoy because they are a massive part of my reading. And I like the our world but with a twist, but still trying to really remain true to what feels like relevant and realistic, and I think it's incredibly well done. It's my most listened to audiobook, with racking up 5 times I've now listened to it. My next pick is It's All a Game by Tristan Donovan. This is a perfect example of a micro-history, which is exactly the kind of thing I love. It's a history of board games, and it goes all the way back to like ancient Egyptians, carries you through to the modern day, and looks at how history of leisure and board games can really reflect a lot about societal values. There's a really great section that talks about the evolution of chess and connections with like the Queen gaining more power at the same time as there being very politically savvy, powerful women on various thrones across the world. And yeah, it's just really interesting. Each chapter is a different board game focus, and it is that perfect sort of weird micro history. Wouldn't have expected to pick it up and enjoy it, but those are the kind of books that I bloody love finding. I love me a little micro history. I've read tons. The next one is The Space Between Worlds. Cannot remember the author. It will be here. I'm very sorry. This is a speculative sci-fi book where we can jump between multiverses, but only if your counterpart in the other multiverse has died. So there's a government agency that comes about using this as a way of like manipulating different worlds, but they tend to employ people who come from very poor socioeconomic backgrounds, and a lot of black people and people, basically non-white people, because they're more likely to have been killed in their multiverse counterpart, which is dark in its own right. And it's basically a look at that and this particular woman who is an operative and the various instances of how she's been killed in other worlds, and it gets wrapped into a big political intrigue plot. It's a really interesting look at sci-fi, the concept of like the multiverse, and also a load of look at like social justice in general, and like has conversations about race throughout it. And it is just that wonderful blend of like sort of things that are still important and hit hard to home, but also crazy sci-fi speculative stuff. And I think for me, my favourite kind of sci-fi is one that is using sci-fi to make a commentary on our current day, and this does a really good job of that. So very good. Let me find the author, because it's not okay to just say I don't know, so bear with. Micaiah Johnson, there we go. The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. 5 stars I gave it. And then we have Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. This is a great example of a classic that I really enjoy, and like a really good example of classic writing. I like war fiction, I always have done. I like it both in historical and in classics. This one is about World War II, and it is about a fighter pilot who there's like constantly self-referential humour in it, and like real dark humour. And the catch-22 is you have to be crazy to fight in a war, but if you know that you're crazy to fight in the war, then you're sane enough to be kept in the war, basically. And it kind of keeps looping. And yeah, it's just, I adored this book. It was so clever with what it did, and I think it's a really great example of classics that I like. And then the final one is My Fate Rake by Eva Leigh. This is a great example of romance that I like. It's a historical romance where it is a fake dating trope. Both of our main characters are massive science nerds, and they are basically using each other to try and make each other look more attractive and like sort of change their reputation a bit. It's got a wonderful like slight obliviousness, friends to lovers energy as well, and it also has this really amazing sex scene at the end, and it is not a closed door even in the slightest, so greatly appreciated it for multiple reasons. My rabbit has just appeared. Someone wanted a cameo for my bunny, so there's the cameo for my bunny. They're gorgeous. You gonna be good whilst mummy's talking? Okay, no promises. The next question is a book that should have been up your street and then didn't quite hit the spot, and that is for me Mudlock by Lara Maiklem. This is a non-fiction about a woman who engages in mudlarking, which is basically when the tides go out with the River Thames, you like go foraging through the stuff that's in like the silt and the mud, and you find various antiques and sort of bits of kind of paraphernalia of history of London. And then in doing so, this book is a look at the hobby of mudlarking and also a history of London in its own right. So it should have been perfect. Like, this is exactly the kind of micro history that should have been up my street, but it didn't vibe for me. I gave it 3 stars, and I actually wrote a review on Goodreads. It was basically like, I really encourage you to read it, and I do encourage everybody here to read it if it sounds up your street. I think her writing style just didn't gel with me, and there was just something about it tonally that didn't work. And I wish I could give any more information about that fact. Sorry, my rabbit's now being cheeky. But it didn't work, and that's all there is to it. The next question is a book that shouldn't have been your taste and totally did work, and for me this has to be Kurt Angle's It's True, It's True. This is what I was on about sports memoirs earlier. I'm not a sports person, I don't give a shit about wrestling, I haven't watched any of it, I have no idea, it has no nostalgia, no connection for me whatsoever. This is a book that I read because Andy and I swapped our TBRs a good couple of years ago now, and this was one of the books on it, and it's his like most reread book, he reckons, and it tracks Kurt Angle's career both as an amateur wrestler and then a professional wrestler, and I was hooked. I was like stay up till 3 AM levels hooked. I don't know what it was, but it was just, Kurt Angle writes with such a like, most sports memoirs, the people writing them are not very literary. They don't tend to really think through why they're writing the book. It's a bit of like a money grab. Whereas for Kurt Angle, he really was reflecting on his career and what each individual match had taught him, and the ways that amateur wrestling and the training for that had influenced his career in the professional wrestling, and the differences between the two, and the whole kind of conversation about work ethic and what it means to try and be an amateur an amateur professional within a particular sport when you're going out for things like the Olympics, what that kind of training is like and how you finance it and things. He also has like broken his neck multiple times and yet still won the various fights that he's been in with a broken neck. So for me, like, just feat of humankind, it's crazy. So if you're like me and you don't like sports memoirs, I would actually really heavily recommend this book because it was so cool in so many different ways, and I was not expecting it. It made it onto my favourites list of that year. What the hell? I don't care about wrestling. Why did I like this book? But I did. And yeah, great example. The next question is, show us some books on your TBR that seem like they should be exactly to your taste. The first one I have is Blood, Sweat and Pixels, and this is, it's going to be here, can't remember who, it'll be down below as well. This is actually a look at the history of video games and what it is like to try and get a video game from idea actually to execution and full completion. I think this is going to be really cool. Then I have When the Sleeper Wakes by H.G. Wells. I really love H.G. Wells, great example of classic sci-fi, and this is a gentleman who falls asleep or is in a coma and then wakes up like many years into the future. I think it could be fun. I also have Time Traveler History. Again, author's going to be over here somewhere, and this is a look at the concept of time travel, both sort of in social cultural perspectives, but also scientifically, would it be possible, and a history of the idea. I think it's going to be really cool. Then I have River Kings, again title, author, everything's going to be over here, and that is a look at Vikings and just a reimagining and re-understanding of them connected more with the international trade of their time. Should be right up my street, love me a bit of history. The next question is a booktuber you watch with similar taste to you, and I have 3 for you. First of all is the incredibly well-known Book Olive, who is definitely queen of non-fiction on this list. Our tastes align quite closely when it comes to speculative fiction and also to nature writing in particular, and she's a big fan of a weird microhistory as well, so I really kind of see a lot of my reading lining up with her. Then I have Audrey Approved, who also reads a really lovely collection of non-fiction. We have a lot of crossover in our books. I don't watch her as much on YouTube, but I follow her on Instagram a lot. She writes these really great reviews where there's the review in the comments, but in the photo it's got a like for people who like, and then gives you like little bullet points as to who this book might appeal to, and I think it's a really fun way of doing reviews. So I do still watch her on YouTube, but not as much as I like interact with her Instagram, if that makes sense. And then I have Natalie over at Curious Reader, who reads a lot of, again, nature writing, a lot of translated fiction, and she's really focused on trying to read around the world, and that sort of appeals to a lot of the reading that I'm trying to do, especially more at the moment. She reads a fair number of classics as well, and we've hosted Springathon together in the past, which was a nature writing readathon, so we've got a lot of similar tastes in that area. The next question is, have you always had this taste in books, or has it changed over time? And I think connected back to the kind of idea of never say never, it has changed quite a lot over the years, but it's sort of, it waxes and wanes in many different ways, but the reading is sort of the central part. Like, I definitely wasn't reading any kind of contemporary fiction sort of 3-4 years ago, but now I'm reading tons. I go through phases of not reading much non-fiction and then reading loads. Classics is something that kind of goes up and down in my reading, very much just about what's going on in life. And I think especially the past couple of years with the apprenticeship that I was on, it really highlighted I didn't have the headspace to do much reading, so it dramatically changed what books I was reading, and that's completely fine, because books are always going to be there to kind of come back to, and it's lovely when your tastes do fluctuate because they're always still kind of true to you in that moment, if that makes sense. And then the final question is not really a question, it's just tag some people. So Audrey approved. If you haven't done this one already, please do this tag. A lot of people have done this one, so if I've tagged you and already done it, I'm sorry, I've completely lost track. I'd also like to tag Taking Tea with Catherine and Tokyo Chemist are 2 other people I'd like to tag. So also, if you want to do this and you've not been tagged, screw it, just do it. I don't think I was tagged by anybody, just do whatever you want. So there you go, that's everything from me. Do let me know in the comments down below, what do you think? Can you quantify your reading taste in any way? I was hoping this might make it a bit clearer what I read, but the answer appears to be just everything and nothing, so I don't think that's very helpful. I've always considered myself an omnivore reader, someone who eats from a wide range of different food palettes, someone who reads from all the genres, shall we say. So do let me know in the comments down below, is there a genre that you definitely wouldn't read? And just because it was requested recently, we're going to have another little cameo from my bunny. She says, "Hello, I'm snoozing. I want to sleep. Leave me alone." Have a wonderful reading week. Bye.